This is modern Poland. Exquisite skyscrapers, excellent roads, new universities, ice palaces, fairs, and theaters. Hundreds of thousands of migrants come to the country, and Poland's economy is called a phenomenon in the European Union. But 30 years ago, the country looked like this. Empty shelves in stores, shortages of everything, long lines, and a life of cards. So what has changed in these 30 years? Today, in 10 minutes, I will tell you why Poland has become rich, how it has been showing the best rate of development in Europe for 20 years, and whether Poland will be able to become the best economic country on the continent by 2040. And most importantly, what problems could prevent it from doing so. Hello! This is the backside of Poland, which is not described in any travel guide. Let's go! First, let's look at Poland's GDP over the past 10 years. We can see a steady growth of the economy, except for the years of 2015 and 2016. Today, the country's GDP is $697 billion, which makes it the 6th largest in Europe and 21st largest in the world. By 2040, many predict that Poland's economy will be the second or even the first in Europe, ahead of the UK and Germany. But how did it all start, and why did Poland make such a rapid leap? Let's turn our guide a few pages back. Immediately after the end of World War II, Poland was completely dependent on the Soviet Union. It was a communist country with a planned economy. The entire economy was centered on state property, and because of that, by the end of the 1980s, Poland's economic situation was the worst of all the developed countries. There was a huge shortage of goods, a card system, and fuel on a calendar. At that time, the average salary in Poland was 10 times lower than in its neighbor Germany. In addition, the countries of the socialist camp were beginning to gain freedom from the influence of the Soviet Union. So the Polish government realized that something had to be done and took decisive action. Prime Minister Leszyk Balcerowicz came up with a plan for shock therapy. What did it consist of? It was to make reforms that would allow the transition from a planned economy to a market economy. First of all, he removed price controls. On the one hand, this sharply reduced the shortage of goods, but on the other hand, it raised prices dramatically. As you can imagine, ordinary people took this extremely negatively. But thanks to this reform, the country started to have a full-fledged trade. Next, the Central Bank of Poland was banned from printing money in order to stop inflation, which was 500% by 1990. They also banned raising salaries for civil servants. Again, ordinary people reacted negatively. At the same time, Poland was adopting a law on foreign investment, which, as you know, allows attracting foreign money to the country. What did it consist of? Investors received preferential terms and conditions, and the registration procedure was simplified as much as possible, which allowed both foreigners and Polish people to open new businesses. As a result, 600,000 private enterprises were opened in 1992. It is impressive. And finally, the process of privatization of enterprises and closure of mediocre state-owned companies began, but it was a slow process. Thanks to this, Poland became the only country, unlike other former socialist countries, whose economy was not dominated by oligarchs. But as I have already said, at the very beginning of the reforms, the situation of ordinary citizens only worsened. Due to the closure of enterprises and the release of prices into free float, mass unemployment and price increases began in the country. That is why these reforms were called shock therapy. But in the long run, these changes worked. Due to the reforms, GDP growth in the 90s averaged 5%. In addition, because Poland was the first socialist country to switch to a liberal economic model, many Western countries forgave Poland some of its debts. In particular, they wrote off $25 billion in debt. But there is one factor that makes Poland's economy very different from other economic miracles in the global economy. in particular from the economic miracles of the Asian tigers, Korea, Singapore, or Taiwan. Usually, when everything works, they try not to touch anything and continue to develop it, but not in the case of Poland. After the famous Balcerowicz reforms, which yielded a positive result, Poland made a turn towards Europe and joined the European Union. This happened in 2004, and it had an immediate impact. First, given the cheap labor force in Poland and favorable conditions for business at that time, Western companies began to move their production to Poland. Second, between 2004 and 2020, Poland received $211 billion from the European Union. And what do you think it spent it on? On improving everything in the country. And most importantly, it invested this money in Polish production. As a result, Polish exports have been growing much faster than GDP. And what does Poland produce and export around the world? If you think that it is agricultural products as it was 30 years ago, you are very wrong. 31.5% of Poland's GDP is accounted for by industry, and only 4% is agriculture. Yes, it is precisely the engineering industry that makes the Polish economy strong. Poland produces fishing boats, construction and road machines, railroad cars, defense products, helicopters, household appliances, and even TV sets. The annual turnover for this is $70 billion. The chemical industry, metallurgy, and food industry also account for a significant share of exports. The main country for export is Germany, as well as the Czech Republic, the United Kingdom, France, and the Netherlands. Another factor that has had a positive impact on the Polish economy is that Poland still has its own currency, zloty. This is a huge economic lever within the country. Thanks to this, the cost of production in Poland is cheaper than in Europe. And another advantage is the tax legislation. Poland is very skillful at maneuvering between EU standards and keeping taxes lower than in France or Germany. Currently, the tax for an average Pole is 20 to 26%, while in Germany it is 34%. A large domestic market also plays in the Poles' favor. It is easier for Polish entrepreneurs to sell their goods than at least their neighbors from Lithuania and Latvia. Therefore, it is not surprising that domestic demand has been the main driver of the Polish economy's growth in recent years. Today, domestic consumption of goods accounts for 61% of Polish GDP, which is much higher than the EU average and more closely resembles the American market. But will Poland be able to develop as rapidly in the future? And can it really overtake the economies of the UK or Germany? What problems can prevent it from doing so? We'll talk about this in a moment. But first, subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss a lot of interesting things. So, what can prevent Poland from developing? To begin with, it is the dependence of the Polish economy on Germany. As I said, 28% of exports go to Germany. This is, of course, not as much as, say, Canada's dependence on the United States, where this figure is 75%. But still, if the economy in Germany deteriorates, it will affect Poland. On the other hand, Poland is still heavily dependent on foreign investment, and although technology centers are opening in Poland, they are mostly foreign, not Polish. And as we already know, innovation is one of the engines of economic progress. Unfortunately, Poland ranks only 41st in this indicator, which can significantly affect the development of the Polish economy in the future. Another risk is related to the internal situation in Poland itself. The fact is that Poland is a very divided country. On the one hand, there is a liberal and progressive Poland, and on the other hand, a deeply conservative and religious one. And it is extremely difficult for these two sides to come to an agreement with each other. And this division may also affect the development of the country as a whole in the future. So, will Poland be able to continue to pursue the policy of the Polish economic miracle? Over the past 3 decades, it has consistently succeeded finding different growth strategies for each of the decades. What do you think? Will Poland succeed in becoming the second economy in Europe? Write in the comments. Thank you for watching. Please like and share. See you soon.